Hello, Edward here from 088. In this session we're going to be talking all about tagging. Now tagging is a really important subject because it actually decides what does and what doesn't get recorded when you record your cues. So let's take a look. Now before we dive in, let's just talk about what I can see on my screen here. So I am running Phantom Zeros software. Now Phantom Zeros allows you to emulate any console running the Zeros software. It allows you to emulate it on your PC or on your laptop like I'm doing here. So at the moment I have gone in and chosen my desk type as a Flex. So I'm now running this as a standard Flex console. But pretty much all of what we're doing here will also be applicable to any other console running Zeros too. But for the purpose of this, I'm just decided to run a Flex console. So I can see the virtual front panel window here at the bottom. And I've also got my LCD window open here. This is just a slightly bigger version of the internal screen here, so that we can see what's going on a little bit easier. Now and then I may also choose to open the external monitor. So I can open an external monitor window which would show me what my external monitor output from the console would be displaying. Top right of my screen I've got Capture visualization software running. So I'm using a demo file from Capture for the purposes of this session. If you'd like to download that particular project so that you can also learn from home, do feel free to drop us an email and we can send you a link to where it can be found on our website. So I mentioned then that tagging is the process that the console uses to decide what does and what doesn't get recorded. So as you can imagine, it's a pretty important thing to be aware of. But the nice thing about it is by default, the console does the work for you. And that is down to something called Smart Tag. Now when you press record and you have an external monitor connected, when you press record, the record options window will open on the external monitor. If you're using the console without an external monitor, you can press and hold the record button. And if you press and hold the record button, that will then open the record options on the internal touchscreen for you. Top left of your record options is Smart Tag. That's the option that I mentioned. So Smart Tag will be on by default, and that's indicated with the red stripe. And when Smart Tag's enabled, the console is doing the tagging for you. So basically everything that we're about to talk about from now onwards in the session, the console is dealing with it and you don't have to worry. Now we've actually spoken about Smart Tag in depth in our record options session. So if you want to learn more about the ins and outs of Smart Tag, do go and check out the record options session. But basically what Smart Tag is going to do is it's going to continuously, as you use the console, work out what is needed to achieve the current lighting state on stage. And so if Smart Tag is enabled, when you record cues, the console is the one that decides, well, for that you're going to need this, you're going to need colour, you're going to need that, and it's going to work out what you need. Whereas what we're going to do for this session is turn it off. So in the record options, I've gone and clicked Smart Tag. It's now gone to a blue stripe, meaning it is disabled. So now the tagging is up to us. The console's not going to be helping us out anymore. We're the ones that's going to decide what does and what doesn't get recorded. And that is a really useful tool when you want to start to get very specific with what gets recorded where. Now that's especially important if you want to start to mix palettes and also cues more effectively. If you're going to want to start to mix things together more effectively, you're probably going to want to turn Smart Tag off and you're going to want to decide what gets recorded where rather than the console doing it for you. But if you are happy with the console deciding what gets recorded where, well, to be quite honest, you can quite happily stop this video now and continue using your console. That's not a problem. But if you want to get more in depth and be more specific with what does and doesn't get recorded, we can turn Smart Tag off, and then let's take a look at what controls we have available to us. So now I've turned Smart Tag off, I'm going to tap the record button again, and that is going to then save and close. So that's then I've saved and closed those record options. I've got a just generic lighting state that I've pre-programmed running. I'm going to go and take that down. And then let's dive in and take a little look about tagging. So for this, I'm actually going to go to my groups, and I've got a group here pre-recorded with my wash fixtures. So I'm actually going to go and double click on my wash fixtures. If you double click on a group, that will turn the fixtures in that group onto full. And of course, as you may be aware, once you've got your fixtures selected, you're then going to start to control those the fixtures parameters using the encoder wheels. And so at the moment I am in the colour attribute. If I tap colour, that will allow me to cycle through the colour controls. And because I'm on the standard flex, I have a dedicated colour key. If you're on a Flex S, you'll have a colour tab at the top of your touchscreen that you can use instead. Now for these particular fixtures here, they have 6 colour controls, colour parameters as we would call them. And so I've got 4 of those on the first page, go on to my next page by tapping colour again, and I can access the remaining 2. And at the moment, they are not tagged. By default, if you've got a completely kind of clear console, you've got no lights on at all, you've double tapped your clear button, if you've done that, you won't have anything tagged. If I was to record a cue right now, the only information that would get recorded is intensity. And that's because the intensity is the only thing that has been adjusted. With that in mind, as soon as I go and adjust my colour, so let's say that I go and adjust the level of blue in those fixtures, notice what happens to your colour, your encoder displays. So when you adjust a parameter, you'll notice it's now gone from having a dark blue background to a light blue background. You will also see in your command line, if you've got your command line showing, that a wheel edit has been registered by the console. You've adjusted one of the wheels, that is a wheel edit. And when you adjust a parameter, like we've done just there, the console automatically tags that parameter. It's using the decision, right, well, you've adjusted that parameter, you're probably going to want to include it in whatever you record next. And so it automatically tags it for you. That's exactly what we're seeing by the blue background on the encoder. But not only that, you'll notice that in my case here, I only adjusted blue. But red, green, white, and if we change page, colour temperature and colour mix have also automatically been tagged for us. This time, I'm going to go to beam. So I'm going to go to my beam controls, and this is where for these particular fixtures, I can find things like shutter, or dimmer curve, or reset, or zoom. So if I go and adjust the zoom, something a little bit different will happen this time. Because if I go and adjust zoom, only my zoom parameter will get tagged. So you'll notice there's a difference here. When I moved a colour parameter, I moved blue, everything about colour for the selected lights got tagged. That means if I record a palette right now, all colour information will be in there. If I record a cue right now, all colour information will be in there. But with my beam, I've done exactly the same process. I've just adjusted a single parameter, but only the zoom has been tagged. And that is because of a really useful option on the console called Keep Parameters Separate. So let's talk about why it's useful first of all. If I were to go and mix a colour, so let's say I want to take out the level of green, I might want to add in a little bit of white to make it a little bit less saturated. What I've done there is I've adjusted green, I've adjusted white, and I adjusted blue. I didn't adjust red. But to achieve this colour on stage, the level of red that's there is really important to me. Again, equally, changing page, the level of colour temperature that's currently on stage, all of it has a direct impact on the actual colour that's on stage. And therefore, if you adjust any of them, in most cases, you're going to want all of them to get recorded together to make sure that the colour you've got on stage is what you get when you play it back. The same logic is not necessarily applicable to things like beam. The level of zoom that those fixtures have, well, that has no bearing on whether there's a dimmer curve or a shutter value present. And so actually, these don't have to tag. If I were to record this right now, I would record my zoom value, and that's all I need. I don't need to worry about recording shutter, curve, or reset. Now you might be thinking, well, why wouldn't you just record everything anyway? Well, you can do that. That's an option called Snapshot. But what about if I had one cue on one playback that controlled the fixture's zoom, and I wanted another cue on another playback that controlled the fixture's shutter? Well, if both cues included both shutter and zoom, you're not going to be able to mix those together. Whereas if I had a parameter, a playback that just had zoom and a playback that just had shutter, I could use those independently of one another and mix them on stage. And this is where we're starting to get this idea of tagging being really useful to allow us to effectively mix our playbacks. So we've seen there, if we adjust colour, yep, just everything in colour will tag. We've seen that in beam, if we adjust a parameter, only that parameter we adjusted will be tagged. So let's take a look at the other attributes. So shape is the next attribute we have available to us. In the case of these fixtures, well, these particular fixtures don't have shape controls. So I'm going to go to my groups, I'm going to double tap clear, and I'm going to go and select my stage right alpha spots. Because these particular fixtures do have gobos. And with these fixtures selected, if I go to shape and I go and adjust my gobo wheel, only the gobo wheel parameter gets tagged. Again, like beam, when it comes to shape, only parameters that you adjust will get tagged. If we go to position, position is using the similar logic to colour. And by that we mean, well, if I tilt these lights, or indeed pan these lights out, well, both the pan and the tilt value kind of sit hand in hand to achieve this position on stage. If I just recorded pan, well, all of this information here of where these particular lights are tilted wouldn't get recorded. And so when it comes to position, if you just adjust one of those parameters, all of the remaining position parameters will get tagged automatically for you. So the way of remembering it is colour and position, the parameters are not separate. Beam and shape, the parameters are separate. But we can adjust that. So what I'm going to do is let's go back to our wash fixtures again. And what I can do is I can go into the attribute settings. So if I want to go into the settings of colour, I can press and hold my setup key and tap the colour key. If you're on a FLX S, you can press and hold setup and tap the colour tab at the top. And that takes you to your colour settings. There's all sorts of settings in here. Do go and check out some of our fixture control sessions. But this is the option, bottom left, that we're interested in today. And that's exactly what we were talking about whether we want to keep our parameters separate or not. This is colour, so no. They are not separate. If you adjust one, the others will get tagged as well. But I'm going to come out of that, and in this case I'm just going to dive into my beam settings. So I'm going to hold setup and tap beam this time, and yep, as we can see, for beam, parameters are kept separate. Tag one, the others will be left untouched, untagged. And in most cases you won't need to adjust them. In most cases of operation you won't need to adjust them. A really useful example of where you may wish to adjust that option is, let's say that you want to create yourself some color temperature preset palettes. And so I would go into my color temperature parameter, I'm going to tap the middle button of the parameter to give me a breakdown of all the color temperature presets. And let's say I want to create myself a palette of 6500 Kelvin. Well, of course, as we've just seen, I've adjusted a single colour parameter, and therefore all of my colour parameters have been tagged. So if I were to record a palette right now, tap record, tap an empty palette, well, yes, of course, my colour temperature value has been included, but my RGB values are included as well. And so if I wanted to make my lights go red, but in 6500 Kelvin, let's try and do that now. I'm going to say, well, I want them red and I want them in 6500 Kelvin. Well, because I had gone in and tagged everything, that's actually got the fact that they were still in white in 6500 Kelvin. So that's not achieved what I wanted. So I'm going to go and do a really useful shortcut, which is a shift and clear. A little handy extra shortcut to be aware of. If you do a shift and clear, that leaves your fixtures selected, but clears out all of your manual control values. I'm going to go and double tap my at button to turn those on. I could also tap Z and use my intensity wheel, for example. That's another way I could do it. Tap Z, use my intensity wheel. This time, I'm going to go into my colour settings. So hold setup, tap colour, and actually, yes, for this operation, I do want parameters separate, and click OK. Let's repeat this process again. So I'm going to go to my colour temperature parameter, get my breakdown of options, choose 6500 Kelvin, tap the middle button to close, and yep, I can see that the only parameter with the blue background is colour temperature. I'm now going to tap my record button, store that as a colour palette, and you'll see we don't get the colour preview, and that's because the palette does not include my RGB values anymore, which is exactly what I want. Because what this now means is that I can say that I want these fixtures red, apply my colour temperature palette, and they stay in red, but at the colour temperature that I've defined. And so I can start to now mix between my palettes much more effectively. Now, of course, that is just one example of how I might want to use the keep parameters separate option. But that's quite a common one you might come across. In my case, I'm going to go into my colour settings and put it back to default, which of course, as we said, is not separating those parameters. And click OK. So that is how we can separate our parameters from the off as kind of a default setting. But what you can also do as well is you can manually tag or untag your parameters. So as we've seen, the console has been automatically tagging as we've adjusted encoders. But once we've got a parameter tagged, such as in our case here, we have RGBW, red, green, blue, white, and colour temperature, but colour mix is untagged. Well, if I did want to include my colour mix, of course I could go and adjust it, and as soon as I adjust it, it would tag. Or I can go and click on it on the touchscreen. And if you click on a parameter on the touchscreen, it will tag or untag it depending on its current state. So in my case here, I've clicked on it and it's gone to a light blue background, and my command line has added a tag instruction. So I can see that I've got tag and then the parameter name in square brackets. The nice thing about that is I can backspace. So if I've gone and tagged a parameter that I didn't mean to, because that is written into my command line, I can just backspace to actually undo that operation. And I'll then go back to the most recent comma in my command line. Equally, if I don't want colour temperature bit to be recorded in my next queue or next palette, I can go and click on it. And this time I get untag displayed and then the parameter name in square brackets. That has not affected my other colour parameters. The tag/untag state remains as it was. So if you want to tag or untag a parameter, you can just go and tap on the touchscreen. Another method that you can use to untag is to actually hold the clear button and jog an encoder wheel. So if you go and press and hold clear, and I'm going to go and jog my blue encoder, it won't adjust the level of blue, but it will untag it. So that is just exactly the same as me going in and clicking on the touchscreen. You can hold the clear button and then go and adjust a parameter. And holding clear and adjusting a parameter will untag that particular parameter. Now another option that we have is to tag or untag the intensity. Now all of what we've been using here, all of the logic that we've been applying here, we've been talking about colour, beam, shape or position. But of course, intensity is also one of our fixture controls. And in some cases, you may decide that you just want to record a fixture's colour and a fixture's position into a queue, but not get its intensity included. So let's do an example of that. So this time I'm going to go and say that I want my lights on, so I'm going to use a little bit of syntax for this. I'm going to go and say 1 through 10 at. I'm saying fixtures 1 through to 10 on at full. And I'm going to go and say that I want them in colour 10, so I'm going to go say colour 10, enter, and I'm going to have them in position 2. So I'm going to go and say position 2, enter. I could, of course, tapped on the palettes on the touchscreen. And so I want these fixtures in this colour and in this position, but I don't want the intensity to get recorded. Now, of course, I could right now go and turn the intensity off. And so I will be recording a intensity value of 0, but I will still have my colour and position information. But I could also leave the intensity on. It helps me. I can visualise where those lights are pointing on stage. But I can go and untag the intensity. And one way of doing that is if you tap your Z button, that of course takes you to your intensity wheel. And when you're looking at your intensity wheel, the middle button of that encoder is your dedicated tag/untag button for intensity. So I've actually gone and clicked the middle button of intensity. It's gone back to a dark blue background, and I get untag intensity written in my command line. So now I've done that, I could go and press my record button, and I can then go and tap an empty playback. I'm then going to double tap clear, and if I raise that playback, my fixtures will change colour and position, but they won't come on. If I was to now bring up their intensity manually, so I'm going to go and say 1 through 10 at, you can see that they are still on in the colour and in the position which is coming from this particular playback here. But the playback itself does not include intensity, and that's useful because I might then want to actually record myself a separate intensity playback. So I might want to go and say 1 through 10 at, because the only thing I've adjusted is my intensity. I haven't adjusted anything else, so nothing else has been tagged. I can tap record, tap an empty playback, and that means I now just have intensity on this playback, and I just have colour and position on this playback. And so I can now mix those together independently. So that we've looked there a little bit about how we can also use the intensity wheel to tag and untag intensity. But what about if we're interested about tagging or untagging a whole attribute? So again, I'm going to go and say 1 through 10 at. And let's say that I've maybe gone in and set a colour. I've gone in and maybe I've gone and configured a position. And I now want to record this into a queue, for example. But I decide, oh, well, actually, I don't want the colour information recorded. I'm happy with the intensity, I'm happy with the position, but actually I don't want that shade of red recorded into this particular queue. So, of course, I can choose to untag my colour. If I go to colour, you might be thinking, well, can you go and just unclick all of the parameters? Well, yes, you can. That is one way of doing it. If you were to go and untag all of the parameters, there would therefore be no colour information getting included. But a little bit of an easier shortcut to be aware of is if you press and hold the clear button and tap your attribute key, it will untag that whole attribute. So if I hold clear, tap colour, that will untag all of my colour parameters for me. So I can now tap record, tap a playback, double tap clear, raise my playback. I got my intensity and my position, but I didn't get my colour, which is exactly what I wanted. Equally, I might want to go and push that playback up. And what I now want to do is, oh, actually, I want to record myself a position palette of that current location. Now remember, all I did is I manually adjusted pan and tilt when I recorded this particular playback, and I then recorded it to a queue. I didn't create myself a palette first. And I might decide, well, I want to use that position for another thing in my show, so the first thing I'm going to do is create myself a palette to help myself. So first thing that I'm going to do in this situation is I'm going to double tap enter, and if you do an enter, it will select the lights that are currently on. And now I've done that, I want to record just the position into a palette. If I were to record a palette right now, tap record, tap an empty palette, well, I haven't got pan or tilt tagged. And so what I've done there is recorded a completely empty palette. There's no information in there whatsoever because I don't have any position information tagged. But what I can do is exactly in the same way as untagging an attribute. You can press and hold clear and tap the attribute key. I can do exactly the same thing for tagging a whole attribute. So I'm going to press and hold my clear button, tap position, and that will tag position for me. And I can now record my palette, and there it is. I've stored my position into a palette. And I can now go, toggle between some of my predefined palettes, and get back to where I was. So that is a useful option to be aware of. And so all of this tagging that we've been doing here, we've been doing it kind of at the fixture control stage. So while we've been going in and controlling our fixtures, at that point, we've been deciding, okay, well, I'm not going to need colour for this, or yeah, I'm going to need position for this. But we can also make some of these decisions at the point of recording. And that's where our record options come in. So at the moment, what I've done is I've adjusted these fixtures position. I might want to go and actually adjust their colour as well. And let's say that I want these at 50%. And let's say I now want to record my lighting state. So I'm going to press and hold record, because that then gives me option to my record options. And of course, at the start of this session, we disabled Smart Tag. And as well as that allowing us to go and tag and untag parameters as we've been doing, you may notice that when you toggle that option on or off, we have all of the options on the bottom half of the record options become available to us. With Smart Tag enabled, they're grayed out, tap it, and they become available to us. And that is because we can use these filter options to also choose what does and what doesn't get recorded. By default, tagged fixtures is selected. That means that the fixtures that we have adjusted will be the ones that get recorded. Actually, though, instead, we could say, well, actually, I only want my selected fixtures to get recorded. So that's the first option we have. So first of all, tagged is the default. We then have our parameters option. So we can say, okay, well, actually, I just want the tagged parameters to get recorded. Of course, that's the default as well. We've gone through that process of choosing whether we want just color or just position tagged using our encoder controls. And so when we go and record that, by default, the console will be listening to our manual tagging or untagging. But you could force the console to actually include everything. Include all parameters in the next particular cue that you record, for example. But if you leave it in tagged fixtures and you leave it in tagged parameters, the last set of options you can then decide is to, at the point of recording, choose which attributes get tagged or untagged. Now, by default in here, you will see a red stripe for any attributes that you have already tagged or untagged. Now, in my case here, I have beam and shape which are left blue, and that's because none of the parameters within beam and shape have been tagged. So they have left untagged, indicated in blue. However, intensity, position, color, and in fact effects have been adjusted. They have been tagged, and therefore they are red. But I can use these options right now to change what happens. If I tap colour again, it goes green. The red stripe means that my tagged parameters will get included. Tapping it again makes it go green, and green means that every parameter within that attribute will get included, not just the ones that we've gone and tagged. Tap it again and it goes blue. And blue, of course, as we mentioned, means that no parameters within that attribute will get included. So blue means nothing in that attribute is going to get included. Red means only the things that you've gone through and tagged will get included. And green means everything within that attribute will get included, irrespective of whether you've gone in and untagged it or not. And so you can use these record option filters to also help you out with deciding what does and what doesn't get included. So I'm going to go and tap record to cancel that record command. The last thing to be aware of when it comes to tagging is removing values from a cue. So let's say, for example, that I've got my lighting state here that is on stage. I've got my lighting state there on stage. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, well, actually, I don't want the gobo in my fixtures stage left and stage right. I'm happy with this lighting state, apart from I want to remove the gobos from these particular fixtures. And so what I can do is I've got a couple of options. First of all, I could go in and select those lights. They're my alpha spots. Select those. I could then go and find my gobo parameters within shape, and I could then go and say no gobo. That is one option I have. Okay. Now in that case there, I'm not technically removing gobo information from the cue. In this case here, what I'm doing is actually updating the gobo information in the queue by saying, rather than being this gobo, be no gobo. And that is different to removing gobo information for the queue. Because of course, if I remove the gobo information from the queue, it means that then another queue on the console can take control of that fixture's gobo. However, if I've actually got gobo information recorded in this queue, if I set my fixture's gobo from one queue and then go and raise this playback, well, it will just take the gobo out, because I would be telling this fixture to have no gobo. And so in reality, what I want to do is actually remove the gobo information for this queue. And to do that, we can use the update remove function. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just go through that process again. So I'm going to go and select those lights. Select my alpha spots, just select that group in the groups window. I can then go and find my gobo parameter, which is this one here, and click it on screen to tag it. What I can now go and do is press and hold update and say remove. And what this will be doing is anything that I've just tagged will be removed. So that anything that I've gone through and tagged, now that I've gone and chosen remove, what I'm saying is actually any parameters that have been tagged, remove them from the queue. So I've tagged the parameter I want to get rid of, I've gone to update, I've chosen remove in the update options, and I'm then going to go and click on that playbacks button. And that has then removed gobo from that particular queue. As well as removing an individual parameter, I could remove a whole attribute. Again, with these particular fixtures, I might want to remove all of the colour information for these particular fixtures. So again, let's go through that whole process. I'm going to raise my playback. I'm going to go to my groups and select those lights. And this time, all I'm going to do is hold clear and tap colour. And remember, holding clear and tapping colour will tag or untag that attribute. In my case here, that has tagged the colour attribute for those currently selected lights. And so all I need to do now is press and hold update, say remove, and tap my playbacks button. And I will then be removing the colour information for those fixtures. Taking that a step further, the last thing we can do is remove a whole fixture. So we've talked about removing a parameter. We've then just looked at removing an attribute, but the last thing we can do is remove a whole fixture. So I'm going to double tap clear, and what I'm going to do is select my alpha spots, but this time I can press home. Go and press your home button, because the home button tags everything. When you press home, as well as that fixture going to its home position, another function that your home key has is it will tag every parameter of that light. And so what I've done, selected the lights, homed them to tag everything, and I can then press and hold update, choose remove to say remove everything that's been tagged, and then tap that playbacks button. And that has then removed those lights from that queue. Because I'm saying, select the lights, home them to tag everything about the lights, and then update remove. So that in doing so, I'm removing all the information for those particular fixtures. So I hope you found that useful. That is tagging and untagging. So we've looked there at how we can decide what does and what doesn't get tagged. And we've also looked a little bit about how that can be useful to us to allow us to mix playbacks together and palettes together. And the last thing we've looked at just there is we've also looked at how we can use the update remove tool in conjunction with tagging to be able to really easily remove certain parts of our current lighting state from our queue. So I hope that's been useful. If you've got any questions at all on any of what we've just looked through, please do drop us an email to support@088.com and we'll be able to get back to you with an answer. Take care, and we'll see you on the next session. Bye-bye.